I was listening to music just now, and my girlfriend enters the room to tell me about a conversation she was just having with some family members back home, and she was talking about her mom and the husband and the things she would do for her husband, not and but she wouldn't do for her children, and not necessarily that she wouldn't do for her children, but it's like the man, her husband, takes a priority. Now, the husband is not the father of the children, right? So this is a different husband because her previous husband died. So all her children are from that one husband. Now she has a new husband, but her mother is old, obviously, and the man also is old. But her mother is doing things that she would do for her husband. Is like you could see she loves her husband. Okay, all right, and they're old. Okay, and then my girl was saying it's true what it says in the Bible. No, she said it's true what one pastor said, or one guy said, that the man and the woman become one, and she was trying to figure out like the words, how the word goes. And then I told her, yeah, no, that's Christ who said that. And I explained to her what Christ said and what he meant and why he was saying it, because he was being questioned by the Pharisees, right? So I explained these things to my girl, and it deviated. Now I'm gonna give you all a backstory so this all makes sense why I'm making this video, because I say God gave me a sign right in that moment. You judge for yourself. Judging, you're gonna see something. So, what did she say afterwards? She said later it deviated into yeah. So I explained what. So basically, Christ was saying, so what God has yoked together, let no man split apart, right? So I explained everything to her, and then I concluded with that. And then she said, oh, that's good, but for every situation, how did she say it? She was kind of like, it was kind of like, well, not. She said one expression in Spanish, which is kind of like, I don't think it's like that for everything, kind of that type of expression. And then I said, well, yeah, I see what you mean. It is a generalization, what Christ said. It is a generalization. I'm going to explain to you. And then I told her, yeah, you're right. It is a generalization because only God can judge. Because it's not for every single scenario that it applies. Christ was saying that's supposed to be the ideal thing, but it's not for every single scenario. So when I said only, you're right, only God can judge. I said that only God can judge. That's why there are judges, right? Only God can judge. Like in my previous video, where I mentioned that you need judges for judicial. Well, my last two videos I mentioned that that's why you need judges, right? Because it's not every single scenario where it's just black and white. There are gray areas. So I said only God can judge. So when and then she left to go and get some water. But remember I told you that I was listening to a song when my girl entered the room, right? So when she left, I pressed play on the song to let it continue playing. And you know what the words were? Only God can judge. Confirming what I was saying. So I went and told my girl, like, you see, what was the last thing I told you before you left? She was like, only God something. I said, only God can judge, she said. Right? I said, yeah. And then I played her, I went back, like I scrolled back to the point where it was before I played it, and I played it. And then she heard it, only God can judge. And then I might put that song like a snippet at the end of this so you can hear it. But why am I let me give you guys a little side note about my girl. She's always been spiritual, but she's never been religious. Just like I always say, I started off religious, and then because of my religion, I deviated into more spirituality, which is more into God and not following humanity and their interpretations of the Bible, right? Obviously, I take some things from what they interpret because some things are true, not everything is false. But my girl has always been like this, but she's never been a religious going person. But she always does what a biblical woman is supposed to do without even ever being religious. So it goes to show you, not every girl who is not in church is bad or immoral, and it's not every girl who goes to church who is moral. And this, we obviously already know this. Obviously, we've lived long enough to know that. My audience has, at least. My girl, before she met me, she believed in God, but not as much as she does now because of how I've influenced her life. And it's not because of my words, it's because of how God answers my prayers. Man, there's so much I can say. My girl will tell you these things. Like, it's to the point where God is my witness. I don't want to make this video too long. My girl would pray for things, and she would constantly pray. And when she tells me about it, because she's not getting the answer, or it's not being answered, right? And she tells me about it, and I tell her, don't worry, I'm going to pray for you tonight about that situation. And it happens because I prayed. Now, let me not dwell on that too much. Obviously, there is a hierarchy that God has set, and he respects that hierarchy. Not that he respects it, but he's put it that way, and he intends for it to stay that way. So while my girl may be not a bad person, if both the man and the woman are good persons, God will listen to the man first, or the man has to put his foot down. Okay? Now, my girl, because of how much God answers my prayers, she's come to believe strongly in prayers now. And she's come to realize that, yeah, God answers my prayers much more than he does hers. And I don't know if it's because I'm a righteous person, because the Bible says that a righteous man's prayer has much power, or if it's because I'm just the man of the household, right? But if I was a man of the household, but I was unrighteous, my prayers won't be answered, period, anyway, right? So obviously I'm the man of the household, but I must be righteous. Now, I don't like to say that about myself, but why else would God answer my prayers as much as he does? To the point where my girl sees it evidently. Now, the point of this video is when I was explaining to my girl that passage about the Pharisees questioning Christ about, divorce, and then the Christ said, what God has yoked together, let no man split apart. And then my girl was like, she made that expression. And I was like, yeah, it's generalization. Yes, it's generalization. Because you see, me and my girl used to be married. And before, when she was in that relationship, she was miserable, very, very miserable. And God basically freed her from that relationship. Not through her, she's always been faithful, but because of what he does, right? So despite what he does, she's still faithful, but she's suffering in that relationship. So God freed her. And I'm not going to go into the story about how we met and all the signs that she's the one for me. And God makes it obvious that she's the one for me in every way possible. I don't want to make this video too long. It's already long already. But basically, long story short, God put us together. He put us together. And later on, when I came to realize now I already knew that sex before marriage was not a sin. But but when I found that discovery out, I thought I could just sleep with whomever I wanted, right? Any woman that I want, I could just sleep with them. And then later on, my knowledge increased, and I realized, no, I can have sex before marriage, but there are consequences, and there are things that God requires of a man when he goes down that road. So, and then I came to realize about someone who divorces a wife, but the wife is not a cheater. Then the man who marries that wife commits adultery, pretty much, because, right, Christ says, unless the woman has been unfaithful, if the man leaves and takes another woman, whoever comes and joins himself with the wife that the man left is committing adultery, right? If you watch my videos, you understand what I'm saying. So if I have a wife and I leave her, right, and another man comes and takes her, he's committed adultery with her, because in the eyes of God, she still belongs to me because she was faithful when I left. So we're still one. So that new man is committing adultery with her, right? So technically, I'm committing adultery with my companion, with my girl, because she was married and she was faithful. He wasn't faithful, but she was. Remember, it's kind of sexist, you could say. He can be unfaithful, right? But if she's unfaithful, then she's broken the union with her husband. So since she was faithful and I'm the one who has now stepped into being with her, now I've basically committed adultery with her against her ex. That's basically what it boils down to, right? Okay. So when I came to that realization, I'm like, well, all the signs that she's for me is there. All the signs from God that she's meant to be mine are there. And like I said, I can't go into that. It's going to be too long. But just take my word for it. I'm not a fool. She's meant for me. So I'm thinking, wait, if this is the case, what, I'm committing adultery with her? So I beg God for forgiveness for that. But in the same vein, it's like, well, I know she's for me. You gave her to me. So this adultery is like, is it really adultery? I mean, you're saying it's adultery. You know what I mean? Like, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say here. This was all going through my mind when I was talking to her, and I said, oh, "You're right. It is generalization. Only God can judge." You follow me here? And then when I played the video, when I played the audio, it said confirmation. Yes, only God can judge. Now, this is when she left, and I played a song, and it said only God can judge, and then I went and showed it to her, and I came back. I read the scripture, and where. Remember, Christ said to the Pharisees that, yes, Moses wrote a certificate of divorce for the man, even if the woman was not unfaithful, right? So take your mind back to the Mosaic times. You're going to see something here. Take your mind back to the Mosaic times. A man has a wife. She's been faithful to him all her life. Like my girl she's only been with one man. I'm the second man she's ever been with. That man, when he leaves, remember, Mosaic times, that man, when he leaves that woman and he gets the certificate of divorce from Moses to leave that woman, he's left her as subject for adultery, right? Okay. So there are two passages where Christ mentions this scenario. One of them, it makes it seem as if the man commits adultery against her. The other one, it makes it seem that the woman is left subject for adultery, right? So now let's say that both of them, I can explain that in detail, but I'm not going to go into that. But let's say both of them is exactly that. The man commits adultery against the woman, right? Okay, let's take that one first. So when the man leaves the woman and receives the certificate of divorce from Moses, does he get stoned to death? According to Christ, he's committed adultery against her, right? If that passage means what it means, if it's translated correctly, and he's committed adultery against her because he's left her even though she was faithful and went and married a different woman, he's committed adultery against her, right? If he has, well then it's adultery, right? Is he going to get stoned? If you commit adultery in the Mosaic times, you get stoned. There's no question about it. But the man is not going to get stoned. So even though Christ is saying he's committed adultery against her, why is he not getting stoned then if he has? So what? God is saying, yes, you committed adultery against her, but we're not going to stone you. Now the woman, follow me here, people. Let's be sharp, all right? The woman, play this back if you have to. The woman, she goes and another man marries her, right? She's been faithful, right? But Christ said she's been left as subject for adultery. So the man who marries her has committed a silent adultery. Are they going to get stoned? No. Okay, so a lot of people ask me questions about this particular thing where they said they agree with me. They can see the logic behind it and they agree. And they say, so that means any woman who is not a virgin, whom they sleep with, let's say their girlfriend is not a virgin, that means that they're committing adultery because she belongs to the man who took her virginity. So this new man, so I meet a girl who's not a virgin. So because she's not a virgin, whoever slept with her, they're one in the eyes of God, right? So I come and I sleep with that virgin. I come and I sleep with that girl who's no longer a virgin. Basically, I've committed adultery, right? Because she's supposed to be one with that man, right? Well, in the Mosaic times, man, I don't know if you guys can stick with me here. In the Mosaic times, even though Christ is saying, yes, Moses is allowing you a certificate of divorce, but I tell you that any man who leaves his woman, unless she's been unfaithful to him, leaves her as subject for adultery, and he commits adultery against her. Well, okay, let's say that's the case, literally. In the Mosaic times, this was happening, but they were not being stoned for adultery. So if they are committing adultery according to Christ, then why are they not being stoned for their adulterous acts? Because if a woman is married and she goes and cheats on her husband, she's committed adultery, hasn't she? She's to be stoned, and she will be stoned. Okay, because that's adultery. Okay, good. We understand that. Now, if Christ is saying there are other forms of adultery also, for example, if a man leaves his woman who has been faithful and he goes and marries another woman and he's left her as subject for adultery, then another man comes and sleeps with that woman, are they going to be stoned? No. But wait, but Christ said that that's adultery. Yeah, it's adultery, but it's not. Because if it really was, they would be stoned to death. So then what is Christ trying to say? What Christ is basically saying is that it's not what God wants. It's not what he wanted. It's not really adultery, but it's not what he wanted. You have to understand that. It's not, again, only God can judge. So, me and my girl, you can say that's a form of adultery, but only God can judge. That's why when my girl said what she said, she was reminiscing about the fact that, because I was explaining to her that when a man becomes one with a woman, they're supposed to stay as one. What God has yoked together, let no man split apart. And her conscience was feeling guilty at that very moment. And she said one expression which I know the background story is, she was miserable in her last relationship, right? So is God saying, despite your miserableness and being like feeling terrible in that relationship, still what God has yoked together, let no man split apart? So she should die in her miserable state, like live in that relationship for the next 40 years of her life until she dies being miserable? Well, in that situation, if she leaves, okay, you can call it adultery, but seriously, only God can judge. It's not black and white. You understand? That's what I'm trying to, and that's why I told, and I read that immediately, and I said, you're right, only God can judge. And then confirmation in the song right away, only God can judge. So I'm gonna play that song. Let me see if there's something else. Only God can judge. Remember Nabal? Remember Nabal, the husband of Abigail, and God killed Nabal, and then so that David can have Abigail as a wife. Some humans would say that, man, that's, how can God do that? He killed a man so that another man can have her wife, or he killed a man, now David can have her wife, and you can kind of tell that God intended for that to happen. Well, only God can judge. I don't know if I explained this well. I'm gonna listen to it back and see if it makes sense to me, and if it makes sense to me, it's good enough to post. So let's see if there's something else I want to add. Yeah. So remember, if it really was adultery. Now Christ said they've committed adultery, so it is that. But I'm not gonna say Christ is lying. I would never say that. But understand that if what Christ is saying really means what he is saying, then that means that in the eyes of God, when a man leaves a woman who has not cheated on him to go and stay with another woman, and another man comes and marries that woman, then it's adultery in the eyes of God, right? So if God really does see it that way, he would have told Moses that, listen, write this law down, that when a man marries a woman, he cannot leave her unless she cheats on him. Because if he leaves her unless she cheats on him, he's committing adultery against her. Therefore, he should be stoned to death. And any man who marries that woman and lays with her because she's been left subject for adultery. So any man who comes and lays with her has committed adultery, right? Those two should also be stoned to death. That's what God would have said, because in his eyes, it is adultery. But it's not adultery. That's why that law doesn't exist. So then why is Christ saying that now? Because Christ is trying to show you that what God has yoked together, let no man split apart. He's trying to show you the seriousness of the yoking, right? He's trying to show you the seriousness of it, that it's not something that God likes and he doesn't want it to happen. But it's not the same thing as when a man is with a woman, right, and she cheats on him, and then she's to be stoned to death, because that law is written. You guys see what I'm trying to say here? So, like when Christ says, any man who looks at a woman who is married, he ain't talking about a virgin, because you can't commit adultery against a virgin by looking at her with lust. Any man who looks at a married woman so as to have passion for her in his heart has already committed adultery with her in his heart. But if such a man exists and he has those emotions, but he never carries out that action, he's not guilty of sin. Because sin only happens when you do the act. Okay? So again, Christ is saying that man has committed adultery against her already, right? Or he has committed adultery with her in his heart. Yes, but he hasn't really committed adultery with her in his heart, because if he had committed adultery, then it's like, no. You remember the video I made about Cain and Abel, and Cain had anger towards his brother before he killed him, and he already committed the sin in his heart of killing his brother, but he hadn't actually killed his brother yet. What did God tell him? God said, sin is creeping up in your heart to be committed. Will you have the mastery over it? You understand? Sin is crouching up in you, meaning it hasn't been committed yet, but it's about to be committed. And Cain did commit the act because he actually killed his brother. But if he never killed his brother, he wouldn't have been guilty of sin, even though he thought about it. So the thought is not the sin. The thought is not the sin. The action is the sin. You see? So a man, think about this. A man who goes around, he sees a very beautiful woman who happens to be married. She has a marriage ring on her finger, and she's beautiful, and she's just his type. She got the curves and everything. He's like, damn, she's bad, yo. You know, and we talking about that's his type, right? So he's already fantasizing in his heart already, like, man. And then he lets it go. He's fantasized already, and he lets it go, right? He's such a man has committed adultery. Come on, no. And if he sees a couple of women like that, and he's gonna be killed. He's gonna stay dead forever. He's never gonna go to the kingdom of God because he committed adultery in his heart. No, he never actually committed the sin, so he's fine. Christ is just trying to show you, like, go further. Like, try to be perfect because our Father is perfect. That's all it's talking about. It's not, so it's not as strict as what you think. So, I mean, this video is all over the place. Like, some of my videos are, man, what was the point of this? Well, again, like I said, I'm going to watch this back and man, it's too long. I'm sorry, you guys. Peace.